In this video, I'm going to show you the #1 mistake why you are losing users in your vibe-coded mobile application. Let's take a look at this. I just paid for this application. Every time I open it, I'm going back to the paywall. I'm not getting access to what I paid for. If I click on View Plans, they want me to pay again. And then when I want to pay again, because I think maybe the payment didn't went through, right? Now it says you're already subscribed. Now I can go on Manage, and now I can cancel my subscription because I'm like, what's going on here? I paid for this, $30 or whatever, $5 a week. I'm not even getting access to what I paid for. And now when I try to pay, because it might as well just didn't went through, I can cancel my subscription. This is why people are canceling your app. In this video, we want to fix this. I want to show you how you can work with entitlements in your application so that when the next time your application gets opened, the user actually has access to your features. And you actually do not need to have a database, a backend to do this. Let's take a look at this. So I already have a project inside of here in Lovable, right? And this project is not validating the entitlements because we don't have restore purchase activated yet. So here's what we want to do. We want to go to lovable.despia.com and we want to go to the restore purchase documentation. As you can see here, we have the entire Lovable prompt on how to access it. We can call the native Despia function to get the purchase history and then retrieve the restored data. This restored data will look something like this. You get the transaction ID, the original transaction ID, the product ID, the type, the entitlement. This is very important. The entitlement tells you what the user has access to. You get the external user ID, and then you get a bunch of other stuff. So here's what we want to do for our application first, because we already have a paywall established, right? So the idea here is that every time we open the paywall, we're either associating the external ID of the paywall with the currently logged in user, but if we do not have access to that, we need to have some ID for it. Now in this video, I assume that you do not have an identity system and your application is fully client-side, right? So what we want to do is, here's what we need to do first before we actually implement restore purchase, because the foundation has to be correct. We need to go into the Despia documentation for Lovable, and we need to look for device indexing, right? And we want to copy this documentation here. Let me copy this, okay? And I'm going to say, when opening the paywall, relate it with the device ID like this. This is going to tell my existing setup that we already have for in-app purchases that we want this paywall to be related to the user ID. Now, this could be the device ID, the vendor ID of the device, or it could be the ID of the user if you have a login. Now, in my experience, I want it to be the device ID, even though it's not persistent because it has to follow Apple's security guidelines for vendor IDs. It's still good enough of an ID because we will get it back when we're doing the restore purchase, allowing us to build a customer profile client-side with all their identities in our backend. So now, as you can see, this paywall now, when initialized, we'll use the Despia UUID, which will be the native device ID of the unique device. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but it makes all the difference now when you're trying to do a subscription. Let me show you what I mean with that. And for this example, I'm going to actually do a test purchase, and we're going to take a look at the Revenue CAD dashboard, what's happening. Because right now you can see I have my user123 Lovable ID, which is just a demo ID. Right? So let's test this out here. Now this was published. The nice thing about Despia is you have updates over the air. So you can just do a change, test it immediately. You don't have to rebuild. You don't have to open Xcode, all that jazz. And it works one-to-one, the same for Android like it does for iOS because it is a hybrid framework. It works beautifully, the same for both platforms. So let me open my application again on my phone here. So now as you can see, I can go on View Plans, and now I get the paywall. Now I'm still not getting access to it, but here's one thing I want you to look at. Let's go and continue here.
on the weekly plan, I can subscribe to that because I am not subscribed to the weekly one yet. It's $9 a week. Kind of a ripoff. But now, when I do this purchase and it goes through, if we take a look at Revenue Cat, we will see that we will have this new user registered with the actual ID of the device, which, even though we do not have a user database on our backend, gives us a way to identify the user. Now, if they uninstall the app and install it again, and all of our apps are uninstalled, that may change, but we can get the old ID from the restore purchase history and then use this one as the ID for indexing the authenticity of the user that could be related to multiple devices. Sounds complicated. It is way simpler than it sounds. But now if we take a look at Revenue Cat here and we just refresh our dashboard, our data, you will see that now this device ID has been updated, and this was a subscription that I just made. This is what just happened here, right? So now I have access to this. So how do we now verify that this user has actually access to it? We can use, as mentioned, restore purchase. But now the good thing is every paywall here, the user doesn't need to be logged in. With every paywall, we're getting access to this ID. Right? So now we need to create the user identity. This is very important. So let's go back into the restore purchase documentation to establish a user identity first. Before we even recover anything, we want a mechanism that can work without a backend to identify the identity of this user. Sounds strange, I know it is, but it'll all make sense in a moment. So as you can see, we have this prompt here to do restore purchase. Okay? Right. So I want to say when the app opens, do a restore purchase in the background. I'm interested in the external user IDs from there. Okay, I'm going to now paste the documentation. Now, we're not going to send that yet. The restored data will come back like this, right? And now I'm going to paste an example. If we go to the Despia documentation, you will see an example of the restored data. What I'm interested in is the external user ID, because here's the thing. Restore purchase gives us the purchase identifier the same after a device restart, after a new device has been purchased. So this restore purchase, if I delete the app, open it again, it'll be the same. This data will not get lost because it is linked with the iCloud and the identity of the device. Because we have this external user ID, even if the user uninstalls and reinstalls the app or has a new iPhone, we can still get their OG, their original device identifier as their user identity, even though their new device might have a new user identity. I hope this makes sense. So the idea is that this one, that could be related to iPhone A. If they open the app on iPhone B, we will see, hey, the external user ID was originally assigned on iPhone A. This is the device identity. So when iPhone B does an in-app purchase, we will not use the device ID from iPhone B. We will use the device ID from iPhone A because that is now the established identity of the user. So we want to get this data so we can build this profile. It is not stored on our backend, fully compliant, but we can use the built-in mechanisms of StoreKit and Android billing to create this identity map of the user to make sure that users are getting what they paid for without complicated backend setup. So again, that was lots of words, but I think they're needed. Let's paste this in here. Okay, let's tell it now. The idea is to get the user ID. Now, and I need the exact name from the documentation. So this example is the external user ID because, AI sometimes messes stuff up. The idea is that we get the external user ID from the restored
purchases and treat that as the user identity key. This one will be established by the first device that does an in-app purchase. This creates the identity, right? So now we have this client-side identity. So let's say, so when we do in the background, the restore purchase, and we get data back, the user identity will be the,
and then we will go back to the documentation, copy this name, will be the
external user ID from the restore
purchase, right? From the restore purchase. There you go. And not the current device ID.
Okay. And then let's just add a note. Note the external ID provided by the paywall will become, after success,
the external user ID for the entire
iCloud/Google store device family. So the first point of contact with the device will assign this ID generated on the device, and then future devices will reference back to that ID because that device was facilitated to create the first user identity key, right? And then, so then when we need it, we have this key in the app to get the user ID / access family ID. Okay, so now this is somewhat of a concept that I just made up, but it's, common sense that this has to be set up this way. Let's send this using chat mode to Lovable, because I don't know if Lovable can fully digest this entire concept here, right? So we'll just have it make a plan for that, because I think this should be something that has a plan. But once we have this mechanism now to get this ID, the plan is that we're still securely verifying if the user actually has access using a mini backend. Even though we can get all of this data, their entitlement access, client side, which tells us what the user has access to, and we can get all the transaction information, and if it is active or not, or if it will renew or not. The thing is, we don't want to trust that information necessarily, because users could spoof this. Now, very unlikely that they will, but they still could. And because there is a small chance that this could happen, we should not trust this information. Best practices. So for best practices, the idea is we take this external user ID, this one here, we call the RevenueCat get or create user ID based on this app user ID, which is essentially the external user ID. And this will then give us this response here, right? You can see this gives us this entitlement object. And in here, we have those keys that are then demo, pro access, premium. They contain the entitlements. And this, in a nutshell, will tell you if their entitlement is active or not. So when we have a paid feature in the app, we can use this to validate if the user should have access to that paid feature or not, without the need to have the user log in, without the need to have our own identity indexing system on our backend, without the need to do complicated user screening, and without the need to do all that kind of jazz, which is pretty darn cool. So there you have it. Now, here's what we also want to do.
We then want to have a little bit of an interface telling us that they have access to this entitlement or not. And we can use the client-side data to show visual feedback immediately, but we should always only trust important mechanisms to be handled by the API. So we can use this client-side data for the interface because it is available immediately. But then when the user is actually trying to do something on the backend, that should be gated by the API calling the Revenue Cat server, making sure it has actually access to what the client-side application claims it would have access to, right? So now let's take a look at this. Looking at your request, I understand the identity flow. First purchase, device UUID is passed to paywall as external underscore ID, becomes external user ID for that account. And then subsequent devices restores the external user ID from restored purchases identifies for the user across their entire iCloud and Google Store device family. Priority use external user ID. Yes, from restored purchases, if exists, over current device. Now there's one edge case that I see. If the user already has the external user ID, the next paywall opening, should they ever resubscribe, should use the external user ID from the restore and not the current device ID. So let's say, great, but we missed one thing. If the user already has an old or current restore external user ID, the external user ID will need to be used to open the new paywall and not the Despia.uuid, which is the device ID, right? So we keep a user's identity, and the Despia device ID is only to start this indexing flow. That's why it's called device indexing, right? To start this indexing of the user's authenticity attached to the store and the cloud systems that the stores come with, right? Sounds complicated. It's simpler than it sounds, though. So now I just mentioned this issue that could possibly arise to Lovable, and now it will set this up correctly. Now I will say you're absolutely right. The current implementation always uses Despia.uuid when launching the paywall, but it should prioritize the external user ID from restored purchases if one exists. Okay, let me see the issue. Okay, now it creates a plan. Family sharing. Find external user ID at the hook. Okay, now let's implement the plan and let's see if this works. Perfect. Now this can take a little bit. So I don't think there's anything we can do in the meantime, so I'll just do a little cut and we'll be back in a second for you.
So now, as you can see, Lovable set this up correctly.
Now let's say, actually, it already pre-made the prompt and wanted it to ask, show user identity for debugging in the interface. So it already predicted what I wanted to tell it. That's smart. Display the current user identity in the UI for debugging purposes. That's always what you want to do because you want to visualize what's actually happening in your application so you can understand what the AI is building and you're not blindly trusting an AI that is designed to tell you what you want to hear, right? I want to get the truth even if it's hard to listen to, so I wanted to tell me what's going on in the application. There you go. So now it's publishing this. Obviously, on the web, we will not have such mechanism because we don't have access to the native features in a web application or PWA. One more reason to take your PWA and use Despia to turn it into a real native mobile application.
There you go. You can have the best of both worlds. You don't need to go all React Native and you don't need to go all web. You can have a hybrid between that where your interface, the core functionality of your application keeps running the way it runs, using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and then you have still access to those beautiful, amazing native superpowers, but you keep having access to this big NPM ecosystem. You can keep using your backend the way you do. You can keep the exact business logic that already works on the web, so you can be everywhere. You can be on the web, you can be on PWA, and you can be on the Android and the iOS app stores. There you go. And you can reuse everything that you did. You don't even have to like reuse it. You can just take it
and just add on top of that to optimize it for the native systems with beautiful features like this.
Now, let's close the application. Let's open that again. And then we will take a look at that. Okay. Now, as you can see, this ID that we have in here comes from the purchases, right? So this is now coming from the purchases and we have the user ID. So now the idea is that when the user has an active entitlement, any active entitlement, we do not want to show this upgrade section of our application because that's bad interface. They paid for it. We should, welcome them. So let's say when the user has any active entitlement, do not show the upgrade section, but welcome the user, right? The upgrade section, but welcome the user. One important thing to remind you, the data coming back will look like this. And important is that we say active entitlement because they may have inactive entitlement, right? We'll copy the data again from the Despia documentation and paste this in here. I'm seeing so many Despia users and Lovable users and AI users in general not bringing the documentation back into the conversation. The thing is, when you're working with AI, you want to be in charge of the AI. Because when you're driving a car, you're not just like, putting your hands behind your head, just relaxing, leaning back, unless you have a Tesla, obviously, or a self-driving car, and just like seeing, let's see where the car is driving. And then where it's driving, like after a couple of miles, not even miles, you're going to be, in front of a tree crashing in there. So you want to be in charge of what the AI is doing. You want to lead it, right? That's very important. You want to lead the AI into the direction of your application being successful, working, and fully done and set up correctly. So this is why I always like going back into the documentation. That's the documentation. Familiarizing myself a little bit with it. You don't need to be technical to understand what a transaction ID is. This is literally, if you know how to read English, you understand this. Because you can see, okay, there's this little funny thing, and there's this funny thing. And this funny thing opens, and this funny thing closes. They're separated with a comma, so there must be two instances of funny things, right? And then there are names in here. You're reading code right now, transaction ID. Like what is written in here? What does that mean? Is active. True. Congratulations. Now you know how to read code. You can read code. It's simple. It's English. If you know how to read English, you know how to read code. It's simple, right? So look into this, like, see, okay, there's this external user ID, the entitlement ID. That makes sense. We probably have to look for that. It's very self-explanatory. Unless you think I can't do this. If you think you can't do that, you'll find excuses for not looking into this, and then you're going to waste all your AI tokens, and then you'll complain why the AI doesn't do a good job. You need to lead the AI to success, and you have to think for yourself because the AI clearly is not thinking all the time. But now, because we're thinking here for ourselves, everything will make beautiful sense. So let's publish the application in Lovable, then we'll open it again, and hopefully there will no longer be any upsell so we don't feel scammed because we paid for something and now they want us to pay again. And when we try to pay again, it'll tell us you already are subscribed to this. And now you're like, oh shit, I purchased an app from a vibe coder. So let's close the application, open it again, and now we will take a look at this. Now, as you can see, it says welcome back, and I do see that I have this demo entitlement here. Look at that. So now we can actually validate the authenticity of this with the backend, right? So here's where it gets interesting. You will see that there is this API, get or create user from the RevenueCAD REST API. We can copy this link, right? And I just want to go into here and actually, can I copy the link? Okay, let's see. Did I copy the link? Let's paste this link. Yes, I pasted. No. Copy. Let's see. Let's go to the Revenue Cat docs. Okay, subscribers. Okay, think I might as well just need to copy this manually here. Okay, perfect. Let's expand those so I can see what I'm getting. Right. 201, 400, 401. Okay. So now let's just copy get or create customer with revenue. Just copy the entire thing from their documentation. It's easy to find. I'll link it below this video. So now we're on their documentation here. And I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. I'm going to say, call the RC API when the app starts, and try to validate the entitlements the user has actually access to according to the Revenue Cat API version 1, the Revenue Cat API version 2, version 1, to avoid spoofing. Okay? And I'm pasting this in here. And now I'm putting this into chat mode because I wanted to do a little bit of research before implementing any backend integration blindly. Now, I mentioned you don't need a backend. That is true. As you can see, we see what the user has access to. And if we trust the data inside of here, we could give them access to certain things if we have a client-side application. And that's completely fine. I think that can be valid for an MVP. But if you have on your backend, you want to give them access to AI generation, AI photo generation, AI video generation, all that kind of jazz. Here's what you want to do. You want to disregard the data that the device is giving you, unless the user ID, that can be helpful, right? But you want to take this ID that you're getting from the device, and you want to make sure that it's actually authentic. And you want to make sure that this user actually exists, right? And this ID is something that exists on the device. So, in this example, we have this plan here that is going to be implemented. Let's implement the plan. What this will do is it'll make sure that we have a way when the application launches to actually validate that. And then I want to have a visual indication on our application to actually get the entitlements that the user actually has access to. If we take a look at the Revenue Cat backend, right? If we go to our customers here, or easier, let's go to the overview and let's check this one out. You see that this user has one entitlement demo, right? But what if I would be, and I don't know how to do that, actually current offering? No, I don't know how to remove an entitlement. I don't think you can do that earlier. You have to terminate the subscription. But let's say we would be removing their entitlement, then there may be something cached, there may be some old data on the device, and then, some free stuff could slip through without being enforced to have them pay. So we always want to double check with the backend what's going on here, right? So that is just something that's very critical and very important that you set up correctly. Now, ultimately, I always want to push users to create an account and log in, and you can give them like 20 coins if they log in and create their account from their anonymous account. But I don't think the first CTA call to action a user should be logging in. I rather have them spend the time to pay me. So this is why we are setting it up this way, so we can have an anonymous login system. We're still validating users' identity, but we're making use of the secure privacy-first mechanisms provided through Revenue Cat and provided through the store with entitlements and all that kind of stuff. So I occasionally have people tell me, why is Revenue Cat even worth it? They're just taking like 1% of my money. I'm like, it's worth it. It's worth it, because otherwise it's hard to figure out who the heck paid actually. So Revenue Cat does lots of that for you. So let's say it should work in the background. So no UI block. Because then if the request fails,
we just want this to slowly, slightly in the background fail, if that makes sense. And now I wanted to bring it to the interface so I can see what's going on. Show a list of client side, meaning from the device, client side entitlements, and server side entitlements, right? And then have a button that only works and opens a pop-up saying you are a premium member. This is how you can then bundle this in. Pop-up saying you're a premium member if the user has a server-side entitlement of demo, right? So this is then how you can gate certain features and still have it secure, because now we're loading them from the server. Now, first of all, show a list of client-side entitlements and server-side entitlements, and then have a button that only works and opens a pop-up saying you are a premium member if the user has a server-side entitlement of demo. Why demo? I already set up my RevenueCat subscriptions and entitlements. As you can see, this has an entitlement called demo. I created this demo entitlement. It's bound to all my subscriptions. So this is just the way I called it. Make sure to watch the other videos to know what an entitlement is, how to set them up. But in this example, this is the user access for it. So I'm going to set it up like this. And then also, which I already have set up a little bit, because I played around with it because I wanted to be prepared for this video, but we need to also get access to the RevenueCat API key. It probably asked you already for the RevenueCat API key when setting this up earlier here before we added some visual UI stuff, right? So now we need to make sure to get actually access to the RevenueCat API key. To get access to that, let's go to RevenueCat. We see the section API keys, and we need to create a new secret API key. Let's call this Lovable 123 as an example for this video. We need to do version 1 because this get or create customer is only available in the version 1 of the RevenueCat API, right? And it's fine, like version 1 is fully maintained. It's just they have kind of like different ways of handling things. So version 1 and version 2 are equally good. It's not that version 1 is more outdated than version 2. They just have different ways of putting like two buckets into what your application needs to do. Version 1 is focused on client-side validations. In my opinion, it's good for that. Version 2 is more made for the server, right? Because that's how RevenueCat started. It started about figuring out who the heck just paid on your client-side application, and it involved into connect this to Stripe, manage this with your SaaS platform, and then you need a little bit more server-side stuff going on if you're trying to build a true hybrid application that works on PWA and web app, because PWA and web app do not have access to those native store mechanisms to do exactly what we're doing here in this video, right? So let's go back. Let's take a look at this. Okay, perfect. And now I'm going to click on generate here on RevenueCat. And now I have this Lovable 123 API key. I'm going to say update the RC API key. I'm not going to paste this into the chat. Why? Because as you can see, it wouldn't be secure pasting this in here. It'll always paste your secrets in those fields and then submit it. Now, as you can see on the web version, obviously, because we haven't optimized it using the RevenueCat client-side SDK, but on this one, we have client-side device. We have no entitlements on the client side. The server side has also no entitlements. And then you see we have this premium feature, which is locked. We can view the plans. Now, it's not optimized as a PWA. I can actually make a video how you can also get this working on your web application with Stripe and how you can connect RevenueCat with Stripe using the integration. Let me know if you want to see that video. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments and I'll make one. Now let's update this here, and then we'll try this out on our Lovable mobile application to make sure that the user actually has access to this. And keep in mind, it doesn't require a login, so it's going to be a very great, high-converting user experience. So now, as you can see, we have it all updated. Now, The beautiful thing is over-the-air updates, close the application, open it again, your mobile application is updated instantly. How cool is that? So now, client-side device, no entitlement. This looks a little bit off because we should be getting client-side entitlements. So I do have a client-side entitlement. And this is why we're also getting the user ID, and it should be active. So here's what I want to do. I want to debug this. So it's very important for us now to visualize the data that we're actually working with. So let's go back to the store page here, and I'm just going to copy the entire restore purchase page from the Despair documentation. And I'm going to say, I have entitlements on the device, but it says no client side ones and no server side, but the user ID works. Okay, I'm going to paste this in here. Why am I pasting this in here? I want the AI to have a fresh context again. This is very important. So I want the AI to keep in mind that we need to follow the documentation. We need to follow the Despair documentation correctly to make the most use of using RevenueCat and actually get it successfully working in our application. So we need to be mindful that we always need to bring in this context here into the AI to make sure that we're building functional code and not AI slop. So let's go back in here. Now it's thinking a little bit longer, which is usually a good sign with Lovable. So we're just going to wait a little bit and see what it will tell us to do. Because now we're not getting the data back, so we will need to wait till this is coming up with a plan. So actually, now you can see it says, let me investigate the issue. Okay, analysis, what's happening. Problem, client-side entitlements are empty because the Despair SDK is timing out. Despair timeout was not, no, this is not working. It's hallucinating. It's hallucinating. Let's say you are seeing the time out because you are reading the browser logs, not the native ones. Think again. Because now the browser logs that are available to us in a browser environment are somewhat confusing Lovable, because now it says, oh, it's timing out, so we need to improve this. No, not necessarily. We need to make sure that it's actually following the documentation as mentioned in here, and then it will work, right? Because keep in mind, we were able to get the entitlements in here before. Remember those blue little buttons that we had in there? It worked perfectly. It did something that broke that. So we needed to look into this deeply again, and before we're releasing it and letting it go crazy by generating code and changing the project structure, I want to make sure that it creates a plan that I can take a little bit of time to read through and it makes sense to me, because AI doesn't have a sense of stuff that makes sense, if that makes sense. You're absolutely right, and love when it tells me that. The timeout I saw was from the browser preview, but the app runs natively where Despair SDK works properly. In the native context, the SDK should always return actual purchase data. Real problem. In line 98, use purchases, identity, external ID. This extracts the user identity from the external ID field within the purchase response. But there is a catch. If purchases is empty or none of the purchases have external user ID, now this will not work. This is completely wrong. This is wrong and does not make sense. We have active purchases. I'm going to send this one more time. If it will still do something that's completely hallucinated, has nothing to do with the problem here, we will have a different approach where we're trying to visualize what's actually happening. And this will be by showing text area with the current response of the purchases. If it's empty, that shows that something is wrong, and then we are not calling this function here correctly, and we're not working and dealing with it. It could be because it moved this function into a different component that doesn't import Despia. We don't know. We will need to take a look at what the code actually says that the AI model generated for our application here. So now this will take a little bit till it gives us a response here. So we will wait patiently, a bit longer. I think we should do a cut on this. I don't want you to wait forever to, well, actually now, there you go. You speak of the devil. You're right. Okay, what is the plan saying? Here's what I can see now. Looking at line, use purchases, and identity is derived from the problem. If purchases returned from Despia don't have external ID populated or it's null undefined, has nothing to do with the problem. No. Nothing to do with the problem. Let's say stop it at a text area and a text area with a copy button to copy the current purchase raw data and preview it. Nothing else.
And a restore purchase button
to manually also trigger, and I'm going to go back to the Despia documentation here,
and I'm going to paste this inside of here. Because the issue is,
most issues, when it feels like it's an issue where this Despia feature is not working, is a state-driven issue, because it doesn't call the function, because it changed this component, or it doesn't load the data, or the variable doesn't exist anymore. There could be a million reasons why it doesn't work. When you're trusting 100% AI with building your application,
it's really good nowadays, but you still want to be in control of the direction that you're going into.
So now I'm just telling it, hey, let me build in some visual cues so I can derive and get the data that's actually happening in the native app. I can take that data, I can paste it into you.
That's why we have the copy button, and I can have you think about why
this data looks the way it looks, or why with this data structure, this doesn't seem to work on your end. And then it'll be able to find what's broken and, have a better way to set this all up.
Let's try this. Let's update this.
And we will then try this again in the native application. So let's wait till this is building successfully,
and then we will give this a shot. Still building. Okay, I think we're almost there. Okay, beautiful. Okay, now, you know the drill. We close the app, we open it again. It's that simple to test changes we made. There you go. And now, as you can see, we're not getting any raw purchase data,
which seems to be weird because we used to get it a moment ago, which again makes me think that Lovable created a state-driven issue where the data that we're getting back is not coming back at all, right? So we need to look into that, because a moment ago, we were able to get this blue list of buttons with the data. Where did the blue buttons go?
So here's the thing that's happening sometimes with Lovable and every AI model doing something. I have a high assumption that when I click on Restore Purchases, it will probably show me the data, because it could be that there is an issue with some hooks, or it could be that it doesn't work at all because the function itself is corrupt. If I restore purchases,
my first assumption is correct, we're getting the data, which makes me assume, and now it was added, right? Which makes me assume that the initial call doesn't work, and it doesn't work with the data. So, as you can see, this thing that we thought, or a normal user would thought, this Despia doesn't work, it's crap,
it's shit, and quitting, is actually AI creating state-driven issues. What state?
Think about it like this. You have a door, right? And we have a variable. What's a variable? It's like a little bucket, not storing water, it's storing data, okay? And you have this variable saying true.
And when this variable is true, you have a condition. When this variable is true, open the store. When the door is open, we can look inside and see what StoreKit is telling us. We can see, ooh, we got a purchase, right? And then when this variable is false, the door's closed.
And we can't look into it very hardly, and we can't see what's going on. This is a state-driven issue.
So if we would be able to look through the door, we would see that the data is there and Despia is hydrating and bringing in the application data into our app. But we can't, because we can't look through the door,
because there's a state-driven issue, because the variable, the bucket with the data is saying false,
close the door, we can't see it. And this is why it becomes invisible to our application. So how do we fix this? We fix this by doing those visual cues in there to understand when the issue is happening, so we can tell the AI what this behavior is, so it can look into it. Because the issue that we're dealing with here is we have this setup here where there's a big project now. Like we're dealing with like probably 30, 50 files, something like this, right? And Lovable doesn't necessarily read all the files, otherwise it would be freaking expensive. It reads files that it thinks makes sense to read. But when you move components and restructure some stuff, like we did a couple of times, it could be that there's one file causing this issue that is just blindly overlooking.
And this is why you want to do context management. And part of context management is getting the right data, feeding it back into the model to make sure that it doesn't get done. Because the more messages you have back and forth with AI, the dumber it gets. You don't want it to be dumb when you're dealing with in-app subscriptions and purchases, because they should be smartly handled, because you want to make lots of money with your app, right? So if you follow this, and if you follow some of those best practices I'm trying to teach you here, you're going to build beautiful applications that just work great. So now here's the data. So let's describe this. Let's say
when I click on restore
purchase, it works and I get, and now I'll paste the actual data in there. Okay? But on load, nothing happens. Why?
Think deeply and look at all relevant files. So I don't want it to do stuff that will save me money in this case. I want to look at all the files it can look at and look at everything, ideally the entire project if we need to. I don't care about the credits, I care about getting this to work. Because I'll spend more credits trying to fight with it, with like being blindfolded trying to fix it, than just taking a little bit of time and effort to look at everything and see what's going on, right? So all of this comes back to context management. You want to lead and guide the AI. You don't need to know how to write React code. You don't need to know how to write JavaScript. You don't need to know like how to write SQL code. But you need to be the person who has this visual flow chart in their brain, and you got to connect the dots for the AI, because it does a terrible job doing that for you, right? You want to be like the boss who tells the developer what to do, right? And this is when you have the most success in using those AI models to build applications. And there are beautiful tips and tricks that developers have been using for years all around the world, such as having those kind of like dummy areas where we can copy the raw data, having a button trigger the function again to see, does it work if I click the button? Yes, it works if I click the button. This will help the AI understand when it doesn't work, to look into the parts of the codes that make it to not work, and then only fix that specific code without restructuring everything and breaking more, right? So now it says, you're right. Let me think about this carefully. The manually restored works perfectly and returns valid data with external user ID and is active crew. But on app load, nothing shows up. The problem, looking at use purchase TS line 57, data, wait, this is called a use effect on component load. But there's a critical issue. The Despia SDK isn't likely initialized or ready when the React component first mounts. When you click Restore Purchase manually, the app has been running for a while and the native bridge is ready. But on initial load, evidence, manual restore works perfectly, returns full beta. The solution, the fetch purchases on mount needs to either wait for the SDK to be ready before calling, retry after a delay. Okay,
the root cause. It pre-clears. We can use the DOM document ready.
When the app DOM is ready, is a good time to call it after Despia was loaded. Like here, this is something I just made up the term over-componentization, because we probably have a component that's detached from what's actually happening that is running before something is even imported. So we need to make sure that it is packaged and imported correctly. So now I'm not going to approve that plan because it looks a little bit fishy to me trying to add fake delays in there. Fake delays are never a good solution because it doesn't fix the issue, just puts a band-aid over it. So I want to make sure that we're following best practices. Okay, now I understand clearly. The issue is on lines. You see how the issue always repeats the more information I'm giving the AI, and it just always jumps to a different issue? Because the more I context, the more data I give it, the deeper it looks into it, right? So now I understand clearly. The issue is on lines 85 to 87. Fetch purchases is called immediately when the hook mounts, but the native Despia bridge may not be ready. Despia is ready the moment the DOM is ready, and it should be even ready before because it runs in Despia, not Despia in your app technically. But we're also importing a package, and I don't know what I just did to the DOM because it used to work perfectly a couple of minutes ago, but we'll see what's going on. Your suggestion is better than an arbitrary delay.
Absolutely, it's better than an arbitrary delay. We should wait for the DOM to be ready, since that's when Despia, which was imported, will be fully initialized and able to communicate with the native layer. That makes sense. The DOM is essentially your application and the visual interface of your application and everything that's not visual put together. If the application is ready, we should be able to load data from there, right? If we would probably have everything import on one page, it wouldn't cause issues. But I think we have kind of like a little component and component and component and component situation, and some components are outside of other components, and then it starts to get a little bit messy. But I think this sounds like a good solution to make sure to only load the data when the page is fully ready. So now let's publish this and update it. And then we'll see if this works. Because technically it already works, but you gotta click a button. And not every user will do that. They expect you open the app and it works. Not on every app open, click a button. That'll be not a good user experience. You still need a button though, in case there's a bad internet connection or whatever. But let's close it. Let's open it again, and we'll take a look at how this works. And this is now all working client side. So as you can see, now we have the client side entitlement, works perfectly. And then it loads this. So as you can see, immediately when the application is launching, we get the client side, and then a couple of seconds later, we validate that with the server. As you can see, the client side one is validated here, and then we have the server one validated here. Now the issue with the server one, it does demo_entitlement, which the parsing doesn't work correctly. So let's say when we get the data from the demo entitlement, we get the data like demo, demo_entitlement, right? And now I'm going to say demo_entitlement seems wrong. I think the parsing is off, right? I'm going to say it should look at, no, let's say here is the expected payload. What does payload mean? That's the response that the server from RevenueCat will give us. So we'll go to the documentation and we'll copy this example here, right?
we'll paste this into Lovable so it knows what it actually has to deal with. Now, this is a small tweak. I can just send this directly to the agent to implement this change. And then we're going to have a beautiful client-side application working, and then we can tie this in to then allow them to run stuff client-side, and we can also have a server-side API, for example, generating an image with AI or something like that, and then we can tie that into the user identity, have a reusable check function that other APIs can call to verify the authenticity of the user and their permission to use and call features, and all that kind of stuff. We could technically also take this initial identity and on their identity issue an authentication token, store that to the iCloud. I'm not trying to make a 4-hour video today though, so we're just going to keep it simple, and you can always build on top of that. But now, the maps entitlement purchase, looking at the raw data you shared, entitlement ID, so that's correct. Might be that there's a duplicate display or mismatch. Can you clarify where you're seeing demo underscore entitlement? Let's say I see it in the UI under server side. That's not a big deal, but it could be a big deal because it could break some other stuff. So I assume it will not be a big issue having this secondary entitlement, but we always want to keep our application as clean as possible. You need to implement one feature, cleanly implement it, make sure it's all nice, not too busy, and then you can go to the next one, because if you have like 50 unfinished stuff in your application, it's going to create an infinite amount of issues that you will have to deal with, right? So we just want to make sure to do it step by step and make sure that every step is properly closed, properly finished, properly cleaned up after. So now this is going to look into this. I assume that this will take a little bit. So, actually, every time I say it will take a little bit, it's done. Look at this. Add detailed logging to trigger the verification. Then I'll see that logs. Okay. So we just published this. What it did is it doesn't understand the issue. So here's what we need to do. Now we need to work together with Lovable. We need to work together with the AI agent. It said, I just added logging to what's happening on the backend. Try opening the application again. Try clicking some buttons. And then I'll tell you what I see on the backend, and we work together. This is how you want to see AI. You want to see it as a collaborative partner. You're collaborating with the AI. Don't have it do all the work for you. You're doing stuff. The AI is doing stuff. You're sharing that work together. Right? So now we're validating them with the server. Let's restart purchases again a couple of times. There you go. So now I'm going to go to check to chat mode. Let's see, what do the logs say? Okay, so I just did what the AI told me, because you want to see AI as a partner you're working with, you're collaborating with, like a virtual employee, and not like a machine that just do this and fix it. And, you're not going to tell a person, just figure it out and just don't talk to me, right? You are working with that together to find a resolution, a solution to a problem. And that's how you want to work with AI. And that's how you want to see and treat the AI. So the AI will treat you well as well. So as you can see, we will have this demo entitlement. And for some reason, we're getting this demo entitlement. That could be something happening with RevenueCat. It's not a parsing bug in our code. The RevenueCat API itself is returning 2 entitlements. Your subscription entitlement, a separate entitlement, not the space before. This means your RevenueCat dashboard, you have an entitlement. No, I have not added. There is only demo, not demo entitlement. Stripped away, name, once, and only keep name once. I think this is kind of like a little imperfection that the API is returning. Maybe they have some internal add-ons kind of like in their
the way they're querying stuff. So we just need to strip those away because they're not important for our application, because underscore space entitlement is the same as the entitlement itself. This is kind of like just an extension of the data, probably providing more data. So we can just join them. So now that's going to create a plan to strip them away. So we get a more cleaner structure of this. Let's implement that plan for the server-side verification. And then we will try this again. And then we can also build in a little server function that is reusing the existing edge function that we built on our cloud backend. As you take a look here, we have no user database, but we do have our edge function. And this edge function is verifying an entitlement. And this one here is getting the subscription entitlement. I think we're working with this one. This one seems to be something that it disregarded. Yeah, invoked 0 times. So I think it kind of like added to it accidentally. So we may want to tell it to clean up stuff on the back end that we do not need anymore. But now let's publish and update this. Let's make sure that everything looks correct to us, looks beautiful. And then we will, add a little bit more to this and try some other stuff. Wait. In the meantime, oh, perfect, it's done. Let's close the app, open it again. That's how simple it is building hybrid applications. And now we see that in this example, we're not even getting the client-side entitlement. Okay, might as well just broke something again. Let's see. Oh no, actually now it works. Okay, perfect. Okay, maybe there was something wrong. Let's try opening this again. Doesn't help us if it only works one in a couple of times. Okay, let's make it a little bit more aggressive. Okay, so it does actually work. Okay, something seemed to be off there, but I think we're good now. Try this one more time, and I want to show you stuff and show you how to set up stuff that won't work. No, so it does work perfect. We get the client-side entitlement, and we get the server-side entitlement. Okay, now as you can see, I can access the premium feature. Premium feature, congratulations, you have verified access. Awesome. So this pop-up is only opening if I am on the premium application. This can be, a client-side feature to generate an invoice, right? That runs fully client-side without the need to have a backend. If we want to access something through the backend, this is where we need to have a little bit more of a backend implementation, which I want to show you how to prompt. Let's say add an AI poem generator. I'm going to do some very boring stuff today. And add an AI joke generator. The user can only access it if on the server-side API, if on the server-side API for generating the joke, the user has access to the demo, and your example could be premium, entitlement. Send this. And now I'm going to say, do not just validate it client side, have secondary server side verification again, right? So now in this example, we say add an AI joke generator. The user can only access it if on the server-side API for generating the joke, the user has access to the demo entitlement. Do not just validate it client-side, because we do get the server-side information client-side, but if we just trust this, again, this could be spoofed by users. They could just inject some code into the app to spoof this one to generate 1 million jokes on your expense. So you want to take this data again, and this server-side one can prevent this button from working correctly, right? So this is secondary client-side protection. This one is telling you what the device is telling you. This one is calling the server, telling you what the server is telling you. So this one can access the button. The server-side can let you access the button. But So this one will let you access client-side stuff.
But when you have stuff that actually costs you money, like AI generation, you don't want this to just trust the server-side validation, because what if someone finds your API, your endpoint, and they just call it? You want some verification to it. So in this example, we are treating essentially this user identity as, in this example, the user that should be calling this, right? So in this example, you can see that we're then verifying this when we're calling this. It's not saying, oh, perfect, they tell me on the front end they are verified. I'm going to take the ID again, verified with a RevenueCat API, and only then I'm going to generate stuff. You can then also replicate and use webhooks, right, to create a replication of the RevenueCat database with your database, which is what I would always suggest. But if you're building a utility application, it's just a simple thing. This can be a good way to start. The end goal should be having your own database, having login with Google as an option once you got their money, right? And all that kind of stuff. But this is just about the concept, detailed about the concept of having a client-side verification system and using the store APIs. So now, as you can see, this generated it. Let's update this and let's see if this joke generator only for paying users verified with the RevenueCat backend will actually work in our application. So you should always create user identities, link them with the database. You probably want to make it more secure because right now we're only relying on this user identity key. You probably want to take the identity key, create an authentication session for this identity key on the user, and only then have them access certain things with your application. That's probably something you want to add though. But until now, this is a simple way to build an application. And then closer to the end of the video, I'm going to geek out on some of the security aspects of this, right? So let's take a look at this. So as you can see, we're now inside of this application, and we should be good to now close this. And let's open this again. Close the app and open the application again. Now, as you can see, we will be opening the application, and now we're verifying this with the backend. Oh, yeah, there we go. Now, after this backend was verified, we can access the premium feature client side, but we also now have this AI joke generator. So enter a topic on keyboard. Let's say code. Okay, let's generate the joke. Now, as you can see, it's calling the backend. It will verify if we actually have access to this feature, and now it will be generating the joke. There you go. So as you can see, we're client-side verifying if I have premium access. So the UI is adjusting to what we assume the user has, but then we're only generating the joke once it was also secondary or third-dary. I don't know what's the secondary for 3 times, but secondary, verifying this on the back end again, so it's bulletproof, right? Not 100% bulletproof. I can tell you a million ways how people can still get in there, but we would expect that your users are not hackers, right? So this is like 99.99% secure, and then I'll tell you how you can go around some of the other stuff and how they can do content sharing and all that kind of stuff. Now into the joke. Why was the JavaScript developer sad? Because he didn't note how to express himself. That's a bad joke. But it was generated by a paying user, which makes me feel way better about this whole situation here of this application. So there you go. Now we got our application going here. So now let's talk about this. So as you can see, we have this user ID, right? This user ID. What prevents us from for some reason, getting access to this user ID, going into our terminal of our computer and figuring out the exact API endpoint to generate jokes, send this ID from an unauthorized device, and spam it? Could happen. Could happen. Someone signs up for $3 a week to your AI code joke generator, for some reason gets access to the IDs,
and then they are spamming your application. You want to work with rate limiting for that. You can make it more harder for them by implementing user agent checks. For example, if the user agent does not include Despia, meaning it doesn't run in the native app, then you can guardrail that. Again, people can fake the user agent. There are Chrome extensions for that. Now, you could make it harder for them. Ultimately, the most secure way would be having short-lived authentication tokens generated every time the user opens the app based on the user ID. But then that endpoint itself could also be called to generate more tokens, and then, there are ways to exploit everything. But this, what we already have, is very solid. We could add optional user agent checks, right, into our edge functions and into our front end. We could add a couple of other stuff in there. So, for example, when we're doing this API call now, this will come from the native app. Now, people can spoof the user agent on the server, but then keep in mind, ultimately, if you are afraid that users are abusing your feature, you should have rate limits. You should say 500 jokes a month, right? Or 500 jokes a week. Or you can set the limit to be 1,000 jokes per month, right, per user, or 500. Don't tell them, say it's unlimited, and then have a built-in system saying if it's more than 1,000, this goes against your fair usage policy, because you can do unlimited and have a fair usage policy, right? And then you can say, hey, we detected suspicious behavior on your account, you need to contact us, right? So we can implement those things. Let's do this, actually. Let's say have a limit of 1,000 jokes per month, but keep in mind that can happen with every application. Like, there are people who hacked into Suno when it was very popular and built bots to generate songs with it. Like, the security concerns I'm talking about are not about this particular setup. They are happening for every app, right? And this is already a rather good setup because we're validating the data with Revenue Cat. We're validating the store receipts. In an ideal world, you shouldn't say you shouldn't share this user identity ID with the user at all, and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's going to be 99% safe. Nothing is 100% safe. But for this remaining 1%, we can add guardrails and say have a limit of 1,000 jokes per month. After that, kill access to it and show a message in the app saying you violated our fair usage policy. Please contact us. You can do something like this. Now, you need to make sure to put this in your terms of service, that you have a fair usage policy. Those are guardrails you can add to make it more secure. It would be 100% secure if you have an actual login system. You're working with short-lived authentication tokens. You could use the iCloud key value store and all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't want to make a 4-hour video. This is going to be secure enough for most applications. And then we will probably make a video taking this and upping it one level more by having short-lived authentication tokens, using the native device iCloud storage and the Android storage. In addition to that, if you need to have a bullet-tight application with the new Despia Identity Vault, but for most applications, it'll be just fine. And you can then always technically, but then your application would need to be dependent on being online most of the times, right? You could, on application load, create an authentication token that only, works for an hour, right? And after an hour, your application refreshes on the next navigation, next action in your app, and use that token to access the APIs that are protected. By having this mechanism, you could then have such short-lived tokens that the ID itself would be then stored in a user table that would then limit the amount of calls people can make from their backend, from their server, to access unauthorized features of your application. Wouldn't worry about that too much. Actually, now the more I think about it, the more simpler it actually gets. So let's actually set this up. So on app start, take the user identity. Actually, I think I can just one-shot this. On app start, take the user identity and create a user in the backend for that. After in that, if the user identity does not if the user identity is not in the backend yet, then after that and on every app load, issue and let's do 6 hour of token for the API calls that are protected by the user, by the identity ID. So we do not send the ID to the backend, but a short-lived of token that will allow us to get the related user record on the backend to protect the APIs with those tokens to avoid bots calling down. Okay. Now, this is what we could do to make it more secure. Keep in mind, doing something like this will remove most offline compatibility from your application. So you could have this feature work for features that should be only accessed with proper authentication when the user is online, because that's the only way how you can validate that they're really themselves, by being able to validate that accordingly through the server. Again, unlikely that this is going to be exploited by users, and if you have one user exploiting it, it will be 1 in a million, and the million users will pay for that one person. But as someone making an educational video about code, I feel the responsibility of actually not putting this off, because I would love to put off making this. But I feel the responsibility of covering this in the video to make sure that you are protected. So now we create an app JWT secret, add a user secret. We need to now have like some cryptography on the backend. This would need to be a random string combination that you would store on a secret place that nobody has access to. Because once you store it, and once it generates cryptographic tokens, you'll never be able to recover it. Now I'm just going to call this one Despia in capital letters, but this is like kind of like the signing key for the authenticity of the sessions that your application will generate, right? So let's submit this, store this in a safe place, very important. Let's submit this, don't have anybody get access to that. And if you change it, most of your old cryptographic tokens will not work, so keep that in mind. So this should be like a good ID generate. You can generate some of them on there's some websites that let you help them generate them. I'd probably not trust them fully, but probably better than just putting Despia in capital letters in there. So there are websites that let you like generate UUIDs. You can use that, or ideally you could generate a random long string on the in the terminal of your computer, and Cursor can help you with that. Or maybe even some, like I think Claude can also help you with that, because it has access to run Node.js in it. At least ChatGPT has. So it could also run that commands for you and do that kind of stuff. I don't think Lovable can do that, because it doesn't have that capability. But we'll see. This should be enough. Okay, and then we'll see if this token system works. They will add some visual cues to the token system. Now, by introducing the token system, we would have to restrict certain functionalities if the token is unverified, and we will have to make sure that we work with expiry of the tokens correctly. So once the AI is done, I have some follow-up questions for it Again, if this is not important to you, you can skip this part of the video. This part of the video is for everybody who's paranoid about security and wants to follow all the imaginable best practices when it comes to security without having to have necessarily a user login in their application. And because this is a little bit of a tough thing happening, this will take a little bit. So let me do a cut and I'll be right back in a second for you. So now it implemented the short-lived authentication token system. Now I want to do one thing. What if it expires mid-app session? We need a way to get that working correctly. Let's put this into chat mode because I wanted to think about this possible edge case. And now, in the meantime, we see that this is blocked by the authentication. Now, this authentication will not work on the web because we're using native features to create that authentication. On the web, we can add a fallback for login with Google, login with email, so we can establish a user identity. Let's go on publish here. Let's update. There you go. We can actually do like a little implementation of having login with email in there. So let's build this. And then this is going to be, this is turning into a more extensive tutorial than I anticipated. But let's take a look. And then we also need to look at the security issue. See. So let's update this. Then to fix this, ask Lovable to fix this issue. Is publicly available. Yeah, we need to give it limited access. So let's have it fix this security issue first before we're doing something else, and we can always go back to the plan. In the meantime, I'm just going to try this out because I want to see how it works. So let's open the application. Take a look. Now, as you can see, we get the client-side device. Now, the server-side one is loading. It's validating everything. And now, as you can see, the AI joke generator is now accessible because it has been authenticated and it's now accessed through an authentication token that is only living for 6 hours. So should someone now we're not exposing the ID, the API itself is not bound to the ID, so people can just call it, because in this example, the ID would be the equivalent to an unprotected API key. Now in this example, we have a token-based, so this ID gets turned into a token that's only valid for 6 hours with a cryptographic token, and then we're accessing that. We're, from this token, retrieving the ID stored securely on the backend that nobody can access now after enabling row-level security. And now I can do a joke. Generate a joke. And now this joke generator is protected by our JWT tokens with the server-side entitlement verification. So now it's going to be super secure and it's going to follow most security best practices with a proper token-based authentication system for an application that does not require login. Now you're saying, hey, I may want to have a web application, I may want to have a website. So let's say for the web, add a fallback to have the user log in with email, right? Now, in this example, I would have to bring in revenue cat web payments, which is a whole process in itself. So we're going to make a separate video about that, but this is where I'll cut this video off because this talks about the entire flow for the native application. And then for the next video, we're going to work with some webhooks, with some ways to also get this working for the web application so it works on the mobile app and on the web app at the same time. But this is how you get it working on the native app. If you want to see the second part of this, let me know in the comments and I'll make it as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching. This is how you have a secure mobile application built in Lovable and Despia, or server-side verification of entitlements, upgrades, paywalls, all that kind of stuff. You can access premium features client-side, you can restore the purchases, you can get the purchase data, all that kind of stuff, and then you have secure ways for them to access the features by even following backend authentication best practices. And in the next video, I'll show you how you can take what you built here and also optimize it to work great for a PWA or web application. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that, and see you next video. Take care. Bye-bye.